Thanks, Taylor. And I'm going to read a text rather than anything else because it's easier for me, and also I don't start talking around the thing. So I have a background as a health geographer and a specific focus on relations between health, people and place. In particular, and linked to earlier work I've done on therapeutic landscapes, and the focus is now much more on health-enabling spaces and places and how they're assembled, maintained and reproduced. This has led to a specific interest in different types of healthy blue spaces and in swimming as one particular health-enabling practice in these places. So the work presented here will be a brief encapsulation of a study of Irish swimmers, and out of that kind of case study I want to focus, sorry, I've missed my slide, sorry, this is all in this slide, sorry. I want to focus particularly on the words trace and salutogenesis in combination, to think about swimming as a salutogenic practice, as a health-giving practice. Trace is a term that's used a lot in human geography, especially in sort of cultural and historical work such as Karen Till's great work on spectral traces. But I was particularly interested in kind of making the term more fully part of the geographical lexicon alongside space and place. Edward Casey uses the term trace of a place in his work on somatography or body mapping, and I want to come back to that. Salutogenesis, and Cliff has written about this as well, is a health promotion term and is at heart about how health is made. It's the opposite of pathogenesis, how illness is made, and the tracing of health back to its kind of original and ongoing sources and connecting up health promotion and health geography together a bit more. When linked to swimming, it might be seen as an intimate sensing in and with different types of waters, each with its own typical and unique character. So for swimmers in rivers, lakes and seas, every swim is an act of intimate tracing. And in research, there's a growing interest, as Taylor's identified, in aqua methods to maybe try and capture these intimate traces and a subcomponent flow as well. Of course, the first thing that disappears in water is the physical trace, but it's the embodied emotional and experiential traces that a swim leaves behind and that accretes on us that matters. Taking Windermere as just one example, think of the natural, cultural, lived and imagined associations that this and other waterscapes have, containing multiple complex traces that are being held in relations, or more broadly held in place by our material and emotional connection to a place, to our bodies. So in my case, the rest of the talk really is going to go through some of the Irish traces as narrated in also a set of swimming on interviews. So this is a brief summary of the locations, sampling and responsive swimmers I swam at, carried out primarily between July and October 2021, but also some in 2022 as well, in both coastal and inland waters. At each place, an assemblage of evidence was gathered and swim-alongs recorded using GoPros, subsequently uploaded onto Ubipix spatial video software, as well as using Android smartphone and Zoom sound recorders. I kind of worked with dual GoPros with a head and chest mounts where possible. And the timing, I suppose, also captured a specific COVID-19 swimming moment. It was kind of just when things were opening up again. And at the heart of the method was an attempt to capture the healing event or encounters in place to uncover insights as to the embodied emotional experiential dimensions of health and well-being emerging in voices from different waters, coastal and inland. I was much less structured than Taylor. I had a clear initial plan as well to do pre, during and post interviews that all kind of disappeared in the wash, literally, and I just chatted to people. But on average, they were about 15-minute talks. Just very briefly, I want to talk about Ubipix as a tool. It's a free-to-use spatial video app. Anyone can download it. It was actually developed in my home university in Maynooth, and it basically you take a video with a smartphone or a GoPro. The hands-free nature, obviously, of the GoPro is probably more an advantage. And when the clip is uploaded, and I'll show you some examples in the next slides, software generally generates a literal trace. It draws a map of the swim and creates that. But more importantly, it aligns it exactly with the video frame. So every point on the line or the trace of the swim is aligned to the precise frame on the video. And that it opens interesting things up. There's lots of different bits of information generated, video, sound, height and speed and direction of the camera gaze. I guess with swimming, height is probably not an issue unless you're going down a river. So one key additional potential also is that you can tag any point in the video, and it can be stored, also generate the X and Y coordinates of the tag, and you can write a brief description on the screen. So that idea of kind of tagging up a swim as a kind of qualitative tool post-swim is quite useful as well. And of course, the other last thing you can do is create sort of micro moments of the swim. And just to say, I also did ask some broad questions. So what I'm going to do is just pick three swims as kind of illustrative examples of those three themes: emotion, embodiment, emotion, and experience. And one is in a river, one is in a lake, and one is in the sea. The first of these is kind of a swim I did with a man in the River Nore in Kilkenny, and it had a couple of interesting trace dimensions. So this is the swim in this space here. Well, and the man I was swimming with was a man with cerebral palsy. He also had an accident, and in fact, during the swim, I had to help him in and out of the water, which is kind of instructive around issues of access, in particular in that space. It also had a really interesting trace dimension, because as I was swimming in that space, I remembered, this is my river. I grew up upstream on that river, and the first place I ever set foot in water was upstream on that same river. So that kind of lifelong trace was there as well. So Killian, my kind of co-swimmer in this, he was very interested in the traces that he carried, I guess, on his own body as well. In terms of his own physical prowess, he was much stronger than me. And re-emphasise that idea that the disabled land body is enabled in the water. In Salutogenesis, there are three particular ideas that are really important to how health is made, namely control, meaning, and coherence. So they're the kind of a sense of coherence. So they're the key things in Salutogenesis. So for Killian, being able to control in the water a body that might be at times uncontrollable on land really mattered a lot. He felt in control in the water in a way he wasn't on land. We also talked about finding meaning in the swim in relation to flow, and I had a little video clip where he talked about the difference in a river flows and that, and the difference in a river's flow during different seasons at different times and the different sides of the river as well. I also swam briefly while I was swimming with him. There were 6-7 other people appeared around that swim. So, anytime you go to a swim place, you meet multiple people moving through that space as well. And some swimming, some not. And I suppose also he was a kind of a semi-celebrity local swimmer. The week before I swam it, he'd been interviewed by The Guardian, and he said, I'm used to this kind of thing, I'm quite famous, and I actually watched him the following day do the Kilkenny swim. As a 1,500 metre historic river swim. It's been going on for over 100 years, and it was incredible to see him, the support he got from people in and around that swim as well. But he found swimming to be incredibly important. He had a very busy job as working in the planning department. He found it gave him huge work-life balance, and he really missed it during COVID when access was closed. And a kind of incoherence, as in the opposite of coherence, societal and personal, I think, took hold on all of us, I think, during COVID. I think we all didn't cohere very well during COVID. Okay, so the second one is the awareness of and return to our physical body is always a part of a value of a swim, but our trace in the water is usually as much emotional as physical, and there's a bunch of research, of course, on the value of swimming to mental health and well-being. So the second example is from a swim I did with 3 people in Loch Rammer, an inland lake, with the primary interviewer, Carolina, who's an artist who uses the actual lake water in all of her watercolour work as well. She had moved to the area from Dublin around a decade before, so while perhaps not having that older emotional connection to the lake, had through swimming developed a meaningful relationship with it very quickly through her regular immersions. For her, swimming provided an emotional trace and affective connection with both the lake and its surrounds, and letting go was for her was a part of the control aspect in terms of just being with the water, not necessarily trying to control it. So almost like allowing yourself not to be in control was a means of control, almost. She described swimming to different parts of the lakes where she could and could not swim as acts of discovery, and also testing out her own and her friends' limits in terms of how they could stretch themselves in the water. With a painter's eye, she described seascapes as overwhelming and like falling off the earth, and preferred the lake swims as more concrete and where she felt held within a sort of affective frame. Okay. The quote here describes how she talks about different emotional moods in herself and in the water at different times of the day, and how the coherence of a swim is kind of produced through a sort of shared mood of both the swimmer and the lake. Like many other places, she also describes the coherence from her new swimming friends she'd made coming from different parts of the lake. They all kind of met together, and how her own work had cohered around that and the local community of swimmers. Bodies and emotions leave physical and mental traces, but the last theme I want to talk about is maybe a more experiential trace that's co-produced by the swimming space. This is from the Gillamine, which is a busy seaside spot in Tramore, where I swam with Martin, who's the chair of the local swimming club, and he kind of manages in a loose sense the facilities and safety in that space as well. The Gillamine is a historic swimming space for over 200 years, so like outdoor swimming wasn't invented yesterday. Experiential traces are identifiably relational. They're connected by our relationship with places through shared memory of family, of place histories, individual and collective immersions in the water. Martin gave a very nice example in the quote around how he likes to control his own swimming experience, but also the control laid down by the water in his own part. So he really didn't like swimming with me and being interviewed because he, like a salmon, he likes to swim on his own upriver, and he hated having to stop and swim slowly with me. But he also gets very annoyed because he has a health and safety role in people who choose to swim in rough water. So there's very interesting things around autonomy and care in there as well. In terms of the meaning associated with the place, he got that through being a sort of overseer or a blue steward of the Gillamine as chair of the local swimming club with attendant health and safety responsibilities. I think it ties with that idea of nature stewardship, and I'd argue one idea that kind of came out of our shared immersion in the water. Finally, the coherence, ironically, comes from the Gillamine itself, I think, in a sort of relation between the place and its multiple swimmers visible in the image here. They're intergenerational and fluidly durable and build their connections to place across the life course, which is why I always like to ask people their swimming biographies. But also the Gillamine itself holds in its stones, diving boards and waters all of those shared traces, living and spectral. I think this might also have been the last place my father swam before he became too infirm to do so. So again, that little trace there as well. And a final slide. So just some final thoughts of why I think trace is a useful word and way of thinking about health-enabling or health-giving aspects of swimming as a practice. Salutogenesis describes itself as being like a sort of braided stream with different channels, and upstream focuses on staying healthy across our lives at all life stages and where control, meaning and coherence matter. Public health policy might better value swimming as an effective setting for ageing in place. Swimming being a manageable physical and mental health practice for people as they age. Though the swimming methods I tried to sort of capture trace through flows and blockages with additional potential around geographical gerontology. So we keep the flow going through the lubrications of our joints and muscles for everyday use as well as for rehab. But the stories and the oral histories matter too. We've all embodied emotional biographies inscribed on our bodies, with perhaps the blue space geography, the bit in the middle that connects them. As my colleague Mary Martin suggests, we are all our own archives. Mm-hmm. I've written elsewhere on therapeutic accretion, ever swimming like an oyster shell filtering out the toxins and leaving a precious growing seed inside. Finally, for better or worse, we leave a trace on the world and the world leaves a trace on us, and our swimming spaces and traces should always be careful and reflect a shared human and more than human endeavour. And I should leave you with this quote. No, it's not there. All right. A very nice quote from Edward Casey about trace, and I can share that with anyone who wants it. That's it. Yeah, it's probably a good thing I lost a few slides there because I would have gone over time otherwise. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah?
Just as around the Gillamine, the way there's the two sides of it. History as there in Dina Maylo's face. What came up for me there was the meaning, as in the separation of both sides. I wanted to notice anything that there was a particular meaning for those that swam on the Gillamine side versus the other side.
You mean the Newtown Cove side? Yeah, and it's the same in the Fort Foot, which is anyone who knows is a famous swimming place in Dublin, and the Fort Foot's on one side, and then there's a sheltered harbour on the other side, and it's the same in the Gillamine. So they're very interesting. They become very, what geographers would call relational places. It's relational to the moment, to the weather conditions, to the waves. You know, if it's too rough, you know, some people will swim no matter what. Most people who have common sense will go and move to the other part if it's too rough, you know. The male only thing is really interesting. I personally, and I've been called very reactionary for saying this, and I apologise in advance. someone say, well, what's the history of the male-only bathing space, which is always seen as very exclusionary. But it goes back to the early 19th century, where men who tended to swim naked were asked to leave public beaches because they were frightening the children on the horses. And they literally were sent off to find these isolated, quiet spaces on their own and sort of go off and swim there. And that's the history of it. But I absolutely fully agree with the need for all swimming space to be utterly inclusive in all of its forms now, and that's real as a relic of all decency. They actually keep the sign there precisely for that reason, to just mark that kind of historical thing. It might get torn down, who knows, in a kind of post-colonial backlash, but we don't know yet.
I was just fascinated by the social space bit as well, and that maybe thinking about lots of things that.
Yeah.
I was wondering whether that came through, and then the question, whether that was something that you found that.
Well, don't get me started, because I also write about holy wells. So, if you don't talk about spirituality in water, but absolutely, like these are, in so many cultures, water is sacred, and water becomes sacred. I'll give you just one little example. It was lovely. We went across, myself and my wife went across to a holy well on Dalkey Island, which is near where we swam. And there was 3 fishermen there, a couple of guys, Algerian fishermen, migrants in Ireland who found a nice safe space to be and fish. And we said to this guy, this is a holy well. We were all excited introducing him to a holy well. And he said, in Islam, holy wells, you make water holy by saying a prayer over it. He said, I will recite a hadith from the Quran, and that will make the water holy. So it was really interesting to get that perspective in that moment.
Yeah, thank you.